She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You people don't belong here." Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, collected, like she was used to being obeyed. Like we were beneath her. The truth. She had no idea who she was talking to. No idea what this cabin meant to us. Or what we'd been through to get here. She just saw us for men. Laughing a little too loud, grilling a little too long into the evening, and decided we were trouble. In her eyes, we were noise. We were disruption. A threat. Not sons, not veterans, not officers. Just something to be controlled. And so, she did what people like her do when they feel uncomfortable. She called the cops. But when the police showed up, that's when everything shifted. Because we weren't just some guys at a cabin. We were SWAT. We didn't come to fight that weekend. We came to grieve. I remember the first time we pulled into that cabin after Jimmy died. The sky was pink with sunset, and the pine trees were humming with wind. Nobody said a word. We parked, got out. Marco put a hand on the porch railing and just stood there, looking at the spot where Jimmy used to sit. Same corner, same worn-out chair. We were supposed to drink a toast to him that night. Instead, we sat in silence. Jimmy bought that cabin after his first promotion. He used to joke it was just a shack with dreams. But to us it became holy ground. Somewhere far enough from the city where we could remember who we were, not what we did. That weekend, we were celebrating his life, not partying. Laughing over dumb stories, sharing old photos, making ribs exactly how Jimmy used to, burnt, barely edible, but full of heart. We weren't loud, we weren't wild, but we were visible. And visibility to the wrong kind of neighbor is enough. To trigger a storm, the knock on the door came just after dusk. It was sharp, cold. You know, the kind it doesn't ask to be answered, it demands it. I opened it, expecting maybe another vet from down the hill, or someone needing help. Nope, she was standing there with a clipboard, a navy cardigan, and that expression that says, "I've already decided who you are." "You're not supposed to be here," she said flatly. "You're violating HOA regulations." Overnight gatherings over for people. No charcoal grilling, no outdoor speakers. I blinked. "This is a private cabin. We own it." "It's been in our friend's name, James Caldwell," she interrupted. "Yes, I know. And James is no longer living. So this property is currently under review by the HOA Legal Advisory." Marco stood up behind me then, quietly, respectfully. He's a tall guy, intimidating without trying. The woman's eyes darted to him, then to the others behind us. "I've already called the authorities," she added. "You'll be trespassed in less than 10 minutes. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "You called the cops." "On us?" I said, incredulous. "I don't care who you are," she snapped. "Rules are rules, and I don't make exceptions." Funny thing is, she was lying. She made exceptions all the time. We'd already seen her wave her neighbor through the security gate without a guest pass. She let her friend hold a wedding on the lakefront last summer with over 40 people in a band. But for grieving men cooking ribs for their dead friend, that, apparently, was the final straw. The cops arrived 20 minutes later. 2 units. No lights, thankfully. I don't blame them. They were just responding to a complaint. The younger officer stepped out first, hand hovering near his holster. His partner stayed near the cruiser, scanning us. That part never changes, Marco. Walked toward them calmly, flashing his badge. "Captain Marcos Rivera, LAPD SWAT. These men are active duty as well. We're here to honor our fallen brother. This cabin belongs to the family of Officer James Caldwell." I could see the young officer's eyes widened slightly. He knew the name. "Caldwell," he said slowly. "The hostage rescue op 2 years ago?" "That's him," I said. "He didn't make it back." The silence that followed felt heavy, not tense, respectful. Officer Wells nodded slowly. "My uncle worked that scene. Said Caldwell was a hero." Karen, who had been standing proudly behind the officers, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Her lips tightened. Her arms folded again. "These men are not in violation," Wells told her. "And this is clearly a private matter. We won't be issuing any citations," she exploded. "So that's it?" 'Cause they're cops, they don't have to follow rules? No, I said quietly. Because we're his family. Karen turned, read, then stormed off without another word. The officers gave us their cards, shook our hands, and apologized. That was that. Or so we thought. The next morning, the power went out. No warning, the generator had been tampered with. Someone had jammed a branch into the exhaust. We found it smoldering near the back gate. We knew it wasn't an animal. We also knew exactly who did it, but we said nothing. Not because we were scared, because Jimmy wouldn't have wanted it that way. Later that afternoon, Vaughn pulled out a folded piece of paper from his bag. It was the letter Jimmy had written a few months before his death. We'd each read it once, the day of his funeral, and then agreed not to open it again until the 1-year anniversary. This was that day. Marco read it aloud. His voice cracked halfway through. If you're reading this, Jimmy wrote, it means I didn't make it. And if you're sitting at that cabin, I want you to remember who we are. Not as soldiers, not as cops, but as brothers. Protectors, humans. Forgive the people who never see us for who we really are. They don't know. They never will. Love them. Anyway, we sat in silence afterward. Sat. Karen's name didn't come up. The power outage didn't matter. The rules didn't matter. What mattered was that Jimmy, even in death, reminded us to rise above. But not everyone in the neighborhood got that memo. The next day, we got a letter tacked to the door. It was official looking, typed in bold font. Notice of HOA violation. Occupancy under investigation. Legal action pending. Below that, in pen, someone had scribbled, go back to where you came from. Marco didn't say a word. He tore the letter in half, walked over to the fire pit, and burned it. Devin just stared out at the lake. Luce, who rarely spoke more than a few words, finally muttered, we should have brought more ribs. That broke the tension. We laughed, not because anything was funny, but because that's what Jimmy would have done. Look, I don't know what kind of story people expect when they hear Karen calls the cops. Maybe they think it's funny, a meme, something to share. But I'll tell you something, it hurts. Not because of the inconvenience, not even because of the disrespect. It hurts because people like her strip away your humanity. They reduce your grief to a noise complaint, your pain to a procedural error. They see your face and assume the worst. They look at your friends, brown, tattooed, muscular, and they don't see veterans. They don't see men who've saved lives. They just see a threat. But here's the thing. We're not leaving. This cabin was Jimmy's dream, and now it's our promise. One Karen, one complaint, one broken generator. None of it changes that. We're here. We belong here. And next year, we'll be back again to honor, to heal, to remember. And if she tries again, she still won't know who she's dealing with. Because we're more than uniforms. We're brothers. And this time, brought back up. If you think that was the end of it, you're wrong. What happened next will leave you speechless. She wasn't done. Neither were we. Stick with me. You don't want to miss what she did after that. And if you've ever felt unseen, disrespected, or judged this story's for you, don't go anywhere. The truth is just getting started. She didn't stop after the cops left. You'd think, after realizing we were all SWAT and grieving our fallen brother, she'd step back, show a little human decency. But no, Karen doubled down. Maybe it wasn't just about rules. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was control. Or maybe it was something darker. That night after the incident, we kept the lights dim and gathered inside. Not because we were scared. We've been in war zones. We've stacked doors in drug dens. We've stared down barrels with seconds to live. This was different. This was personal. Louis sat in the corner, sharpening the old hunting knife. Jimmy used to carry. He didn't speak much, but when he did, you listened. I don't like being watched, he muttered. Marco nodded, eyes on the back window. She was taking photos. I saw her from the trees, zoom lens. I leaned forward. She's building a case. HOA violation, trespassing, maybe even harassment. Devin, who always kept calm, finally broke. We came to honor our brother, and she's treating us like criminals. He wasn't wrong. We all carried that same ache in our chest, that weight of grief that never fully leaves. And here we were, trying to breathe in Jimmy's world again, only to be reminded that some people will do anything to make you feel like you don't belong. The real punch came the next morning. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and nearly tripped over it. A manila envelope sitting right at the foot of the stairs. No postage, no name. Just notice scribbled across the front, inside. A printed document from the HOA board, pending hearing regarding community standards violation, attached. Were photos. Ones we didn't even know she'd taken. Us grilling dust by the fire pit. One of Marco with his shirt off, a dash laugh. They were zoomed in high race, like she'd been camped out in the woods, spying on us. Our backs crawled at the thought of it. Luis looked through them and said, deadpan, I've arrested people for less. I considered reporting her, but we didn't want escalation. Not who we were. We weren't there for revenge. We're there to keep a promise, so we let it go for now. But grief. Grief has a funny way of mixing with anger. That afternoon, the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in. The lake turned silver. It matched our mood. Marco suggested we go for a swim, clear our heads. We stripped down, dove into the icy water, and screamed like kids again. For a moment, just a moment, we felt free. No guns, no badges, no dead friends. Just for men in a lake, trying to forget how broken the world could be, that's when the drone showed up. It buzzed over the treetops, hovering like a mechanical mosquito, watching, filming. Devin shouted, "Are you serious right now?" Luis threw a rock at it. Didn't hit, but the drone zipped backward and disappeared over the ridge. We knew who it belonged to. But this time, we didn't laugh it off. Marco dried off, marched into the cabin, and opened his duffel. I thought he was going for gear, but no. He pulled out a journal. It's filled with entries, memories, sketches, and a list. A very particular list. People to forgive. Karen's name wasn't on it, but her spirit was. Jimmy used to tell us, you don't fight every enemy. Some you outlast. But what do you do when the enemy is your neighbor? That night, we sat around the fire again. Quiet, no music, no talking, just the crackling of logs and the occasional creak of the wind. Then Marco spoke. Do you remember? Fall River. We all turned. Of course, we remembered. A hostage situation gone sideways. 8 people trapped in a farmhouse. 1 unhinged gunman. We stacked the door, breached. I got clipped in the shoulder. Devin pulled a kid out with a bomb strapped to his ankle. Marco took down the shooter. But what Marco said next hit harder than any bullet. That woman Karen reminds me of. The mom from Fall River. Same voice, same tone, same eyes. Remember what she said to us after we saved her son? Luis nodded. She said, why did it take you so long? Exactly. No thank you. Q. Just entitlement. Judgment. Marco stared into the fire. People like her, they don't want to understand you. They want to control you. And if they can't, they'll punish you. The next morning, Karen brought reinforcements. 3 men. In suits, HOA board members. They stood at the edge of the gravel path like the freaking Secret Service. One held a clipboard, another had a camera. And Karen, of course, led the charge. We're here to serve a cease and desist, she announced. Luis stood up first. You're trespassing. We're acting on behalf of the community, she said, and your presence is disturbing the peace. I looked around at the empty woods, the silent air, the birds chirping above. What peace? Asked. There's no one else here for 3 miles? She ignored me. This is your final warning. The HOA board has voted unanimously. You're in violation of community standards. If you do not vacate within 48 hours, legal action will be taken. Devin stepped forward, calm, professional, but with that fire in his voice. This land is under full ownership by the Caldwell estate. We have legal right to be here. And we will not be leaving. Karen smirked. Then we'll see you in court. They left, but the damage was done. That night we sat inside, blinds drawn. The storm outside mirrored the one brewing in our hearts. I picked up Jimmy's old photo, the one of all of us in Afghanistan, arms around each other, dust on our faces. We looked so young, so invincible, I whispered. I miss you, brother. Luis handed me a small patch. The one Jimmy wore on his chest during our last mission. I found it under the stairs yesterday, he said. Felt like a sign. It was the... Next morning, we suited up. Not in uniform, in resolve. We cleaned the cabin top to bottom, fixed the generator. Repaired the fence Jimmy had built with his own hands. Then Marco took out his laptop and started uploading files, security cam footage, timestamp photos of the property ownership deeds. He looked at me and said, "Let her try." Then something unexpected happened. A truck pulled up. We all tinsayed. It was an older man, white hair, leather vest, Vietnam pins on his chest. He got out, eyes misty. "You, the boys who served with Jimmy?" He asked. We nodded. "I'm his uncle. He told me about you all. Said this cabin kept him sane between deployments." He looked around. "Place looks just like I remembered when we built it. I can't believe Karen's giving you trouble again." Again. We invited him in, sat by the fire, and told us everything. Turns out, Karen had been trying to push Jimmy off this land for years. Said he didn't fit the aesthetic. Complained about his friends. His truck. His tattoos Jimmy never told us. He fought it quietly, legally, but she never stopped. I begged him to sell it, his uncle said, but he loved this place too much. Said it was his church. That night, we made a new vow. We wouldn't just come back every year. We'd protect this land, legally, physically, spiritually, for Jimmy, for every man who came home broken, for every vet who needed a place to breathe. Karen thought she was kicking out a nuisance. She didn't realize she was trying to erase a legacy, and we weren't about to let that happen. So we stayed, and we prepared, because something told us she wasn't done. If this story has hit you even a little, if you've ever been judged by your looks, your grief, your scars, then you understand why we're telling it, because what happened next wasn't just petty, it was dangerous, and it nearly cost one of us everything. Stick around. You're going to want to see what she did next, and how we made sure it never happens again. It started with a scream, not ours, hers. Karen, the same woman who'd filed complaints, stalked our cabin with her camera and tried to legally evict Uswas, now standing in her own driveway, screaming at the top of her lungs, "I'm being watched." We were across the lake, grilling breakfast when we heard it. Birds scattered. Our heads turned in unison. Luis lowered his coffee. That sounded close. Marco stood, peering through binoculars. "That's her, and she's not faking it." We jogged up the ridge where the property line ran thin. From the tree line, we saw Karen pacing her porch in a frenzy. Her cell phone was clutched tight in her hand. Her yard was littered with lawn chairs, a cracked flower pot, and what looked like a fallen drone. No HOA board, no clipboard, just a terrified woman in slippers. It would have been easy to ignore her. It's maybe even satisfying after everything. But that's not who we are. Devin was the first to speak. "You think someone's actually watching her?" "I don't know," I said, "but that doesn't look like acting." Just like that, the line between enemies and neighbors blurred. Marco exhaled. "Gear up." We didn't bring rifles, just vests, radios, flashlights. One by one, we crossed the woods and approached the edge of her yard. She saw us and froze like we were ghosts. "What? What are you doing here?" she asked. "We heard screaming," Marco said calmly. "You okay?" She stepped back. Her hand trembled on the phone. I already called the cops." "That's fine," Luis said. "But we're here now. Let's make sure no one's hurt." She didn't respond. But she didn't stop us either. We checked the perimeter. Marco found broken branches behind her shed, some recent boot prints leading toward the road, and half-eaten granola, Lar bar wrappers. Someone had been watching her, and they weren't from the HOA. Devin crouched near a fence post. Tripwire was cut. Clean. Whoever was here knew what they were doing. Karen watched from the porch, pale. Then her voice cracked. "I thought it was you," she said. "What?" Turned to her. "I thought you were spying on me. Getting revenge because of everything." We stood in silence. "No," Marco said gently. "We're not like you." That shut her up. Not out of offense. Out of realization, she sank into a lawn chair and covered her face. For the first time since we met her, she looked human. We waited with her until the deputies arrived. Explained what we found, gave a full report, no badges, no names. Men helping someone who didn't deserve it because someone else did. After they took Karen's statement and the cruiser drove off, we started walking back. Then she called out, voice shaky, "Why'd you help me?" Devin paused, turned, because we made a promise. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't have to. Back at the cabin, the mood was different. None of us said it, but we all felt it. Pity and resentment pulling against each other like tides. The enemy had become a victim. We couldn't celebrate that. Luis poured himself a drink and stared at the fire. "She's still gonna try to evict us, you know?" I nodded. "And if we fight it, she'll twist the story. Say we harassed her, trespassed, threatened her." Marco raised a brow. "She might. But there's one thing she doesn't have." Devin looked up. "What's that?" Marco smiled. "Backup." That night we made calls. Not to lawyers, to friends. Friends who wore uniforms. Friends who carried medals. Friends who remembered Jimmy. By morning, we had emails from 4 local veterans groups, a city council member, and the county sheriff's office. They didn't owe us anything, but they owed Jimmy. That afternoon, Marco and I drove into town, printed our documentation, land title, Jimmy's will, the HOA regulations he'd followed to the letter. Then, we stopped at the HOA office. It was a beige building next to a strip mall. Inside, too much air conditioning and not enough empathy. We met the board president, Ronald, a man whose handshake was colder than the tile floor. "We've received your notice," I said, "and we'd like to formally respond." He flipped through the folder, raised an eyebrow. "You're all law enforcement?" "We are. Active duty." "Yes." He didn't look impressed. "We still have concerns," he said. "Community. Culture. Appearances. Stability." Devin leaned forward. "You mean we don't look like we belong?" Ronald straightened. "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant." Silence. Then Marco slid a photograph across the table. It was Jimmy, in uniform, holding his bronze star. This man bought that cabin, bled for this country, paid for it fair and square. And now he's dead. We're here to honor him. "You think appearance matters more than that?" Ronald didn't answer. Stared at the photo for a long time. Then he said, "The hearing will proceed next week. You're welcome to attend." We stood. "We'll be there," I said. "Won't be alone." Back at the cabin, we found a note on the front door, handwritten, from Karen. "I'm sorry for everything." Underneath was a small brown envelope. Inside, it's Jimmy's patch, the one that went missing months ago. We never knew. She had it. Luis stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into his vest pocket. No words, just wait. That night, for the first time all week, we slept. No cameras, no cops, no threats, just the wind through the trees and the memory of our brother. It's finally at peace. But peace is never permanent. And the fight? It wasn't over yet, because when the day of the hearing came, she showed up, and not alone. She brought witnesses, photos, allegations, things we never said, things we never did, and she was ready to bury us. But what happened next? We weren't ready for it either, and it changed everything. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, if you've ever had to sit in silence while someone twisted the truth, then you need to see what happens next. Because Karen, she made her final move, and we made ours. Stick around. Storm's not over. The ending will shock you. The hearing room was colder than we expected, not in temperature, in energy. A folding table, 5 board members in matching polo shirts. Karen seated beside them, hair pulled back, a tight-lipped smirk stretching her face like she'd already won. She wouldn't look at us, only at the man in the center, Ronald, the HOA president. We sat across from them, calm, composed. Silent, just like Jimmy taught us. Marco placed a folder on the table. Inside were every legal document, title, property registration, and sworn affidavit. Devin had even included photos of the renovations we'd made, new railings, reinforced foundation. All in Jimmy's honor, but none of it seemed to matter, because Devin's asked him seemed to matter, because... Then Karen stood up and started to speak. Her voice was shaky, but not from nerves, from performance. I never wanted this to turn into a war, she said. All I wanted was peace in our neighborhood. Then these men showed up loud, aggressive, intimidating. At night, I didn't know who they were. I felt unsafe in my own home. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. Ronald watched her like a school principal waiting for applause. They threatened me. One of them threw a rock at my drone. Another told me to watch my back. They're law enforcement, yes, but they were here acting like mercenaries, not neighbors. The room was quiet, she continued. I filed complaints because I was scared. When I discovered a friend, Officer Caldwell, had passed, I tried to show sympathy. But they made it clear they didn't want anything from me except silence. They've harassed me, filmed me, and one even approached me on my own porch. I no longer feel safe here. Ronald cleared his throat. Do you have proof of these accusations? Karen slid forward a small USB. Marco leaned forward calmly. We'd like to view that as well. Of course, Karen said, smug. They plugged it into the laptop. The projector flickered on. We braced ourselves and then the screen lit up. But it wasn't us, it was her. From her own doorbell cam, she was pacing, cursing, muttering things under her breath, talking to herself. They don't belong here? I'll run them out. I don't care if they're cops. This is my community. Gasps in the room, Karen went pale. Turn it off, she barked. But the clip kept playing. I'll have that stupid cabin bulldozed if I have to. The room was silent, except for the buzz of the projector fan. Ronald raised his eyes to her. Ms. Decker, did you know this was on the drive? Karen stammered. I must have. It wasn't. Marco didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He stood slowly and faced the board. We came here to grieve, to remember a man who served this country with honor. We were harassed, profiled, and targeted because we didn't fit someone's vision of who belongs. He placed a photo of Jimmy on the table, in uniform, smiling. This is the man you tried to erase. Devin stepped up beside him. You want community standards? Start with compassion. Luis just said, we're not leaving. The board recessed for deliberation. Karen stormed out, flanked by no one. She didn't even look at us. She didn't have to. An hour later, Ronald returned with a decision. The board has voted unanimously. The cabin stays. No violations. And the harassment claims against Ms. Decker will be reviewed by legal counsel. Relief didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. We nodded, thanked the board, and walked out into the sunlight. Jimmy would have laughed. He would have slapped our backs and made some dumb joke about HOA Karens. But all we could do was breathe. We returned to the cabin that night. Just us, the lake. The stars Dabin cooked again, Jimmy's awful ribs. Luis played his guitar. Marco poured a drink, and I stood at the porch, looking at the woods. That's when we heard the car. Not tires crunching gravel, just an engine idling at the edge of the drive. Karen, alone, she stepped out slowly. No clipboard, no camera, just small. She held something in her hands. A photo album. I didn't come to fight, she said. We didn't answer, just watched. She walked forward and set the album. On the porch steps, I found these, in Jimmy's old mailbox. I think they're yours. We didn't move, but Devin finally stepped forward, picked it up. Inside were photos, dozens of Jimmy, as a kid in uniform, smiling in front of the cabin. Years ago, she took a shaky breath. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what this place meant. I saw strangers, and I panicked. Louise looked at her coldly. You didn't panic. You punished. She flinched. I know, she whispered, and I was wrong. There was a long pause. Then Marco said, You should. Go. She nodded, turned, and left. No closure, no forgiveness. But something real. We spent one more night at the cabin before heading back to our lives. Our cities, our jobs, our wives and kids. But before we left, we carved something into the porch. Jimmy's. Initials, a date, and below that, brothers always. This story isn't about revenge. It's about memory. It's about standing your ground. Not in rage, but in love. We didn't come to the cabin to fight, Karen. We came to remember someone. Who mattered. But sometimes the only way to protect memory is to face down the people who want to bury it. We didn't just win a hearing. We reclaimed his legacy, and now the cabin is ours. And next year when we come back, we'll bring more brothers, more stories, more healing. And maybe, just maybe, a better kind of peace. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been judged for how you look, who you love, where you come from, then we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what you would have done. Tell us about your Jimmy. And don't forget to subscribe, because these stories, they matter. And the more we share them, the harder it becomes for people like Karen to win. This wasn't just a cabin. It was a battleground for memory. And we won together. Thanks for watching.